Something we've come to expect of our horror films over the last half century has been a final girl, a character that is usually a female that fights the evil and ends up the victor in the end. Today, I want to tell you guys who I think is the greatest final girl of all time.
She stopped at a light and saw him walking in that field behind the Lost River Drive-In. Julie said he was so creepy.
Hey, what is up everybody? Nick here, and today I want to talk Final Girls with you. And I want to tell you who I think is the best, and I have felt this way for a long time. But before we get into that, I just want to say, this is not to omit final guy performances, because there are quite a few throughout horror, and some of them I love. The one I particularly think of is Jesse in Freddy's Revenge. I love Mark Patton's performance in that movie, and it just goes to show they made a good decision in switching up the gender for the second movie there, because it can work. Though most of the time, it is a girl. Because we're more inclined to feel for a final girl. They're more sympathetic. It's easier to root for them. And horror films have really made final girls a staple. You've got to have that kind of character in most horror films. When you go down the line looking at the history of final girls in horror films, you're going to look at people like, of course, Laurie Strode. Jamie Lee Curtis played a very innocent, very sympathetic, very naive teenage girl in the original Halloween. And we got to see her grow as the movies went on into being this fighter, being a warrior, but she always had that softer side. And honestly, that's one of the reasons I'll always defend sequels, especially if you're bringing these characters back, because I like to see them grow. How did the events of the previous film change them? And with the character of Laurie Strode, you see many different versions of her throughout the timelines in the series, mostly all played by Jamie Lee Curtis. And I think that gives the fans something to really chew on. You can choose which one is your preferred route, but it's nice to see that growth. You look at somebody like Nancy Thompson, played by Heather Langenkamp in A Nightmare on Elm Street, A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, and Wes Craven's New Nightmare, though she is playing herself in that movie. Now, it's no secret that Heather's acting was not great in the original Nightmare on Elm Street. Let's just be real here. But by the time we get to New Nightmare, I think she actually turns in a strong performance. But the nostalgia for that character and those movies really helps put her on a pedestal for a lot of us. And whether you personally like her or not, it's undeniable that she's become an iconic horror final girl in her own right. Looking at some final guys, you could make the case for Ash Williams in Evil Dead. He is the final character. He battles the evil and comes out on the other side by the end. He's not as sympathetic, obviously, but he's entertaining, he's funny, and we can't help but be glued to him and root for him every time he's on screen. And then you can look at a final girl performance that I have always found supremely underrated, and that's Ashley Lawrence as Kirsty in Hellraiser, Hellbound, and sadly, the turd that is Hellraiser, Hellseeker. Look, I love Ashley in those movies. I think she's sympathetic. I think she's also a fighter. I think she takes no shit from those demons, and I love her in them. I hated the fact that they brought her back for Hellseeker in the way they did, but it was cool to see her again nonetheless. The point is, we could go down the line talking about final girl and final guy performances all day. It would take hours. The point of this video is to tell you who I think is the greatest. And to me, ever since I was a kid, it's Sidney Prescott, and I don't even think it's close. Look, there's a lot of reasons for this, and I'm not going to have this video be like a half-hour-long video on Sidney Prescott. I plan to do that before Scream 7 comes out, so keep your eyes open for that. But look, you see Sidney Prescott change from Scream all the way to now Scream 7, which we are waiting for, but based off of the trailer, we get a vibe for where Sidney's at. And honestly, she changes in all the right ways. In the original Scream, she's a lot like Laurie Strode in Halloween. She's more naive, she's more reserved, she's very sympathetic, very innocent. You don't want to see her get hurt. You don't want anything to happen to her. After everything she goes through at the end of that movie to finally fight back and basically say, screw this, it is a huge moment for that character. And from that movie forward, we saw the natural progression of Sidney Prescott. We didn't see her in Scream 2 revert back to that where she's shy and she's very standoffish and she is not a fighter again. No, she is ready to go in Scream 2. She goes after it. In Scream 3, the same way. She has moved away and changed her name. She comes back. She inserts herself into the fight in Scream 3 willingly. And as these movies go on, too, you really start to see Sidney start to talk shit to Ghostface. Like, she's basically like, get on with it. Oh, we got another one, basically. I love that. It's almost like she knows that she's a badass. She knows that she has taken out like every Ghostface up to this point. So every time a new one comes along, she believes in her heart of hearts she knows how it's going to end. And up to this point, she's been correct. And I love that they have not changed the character off of that progression. Getting into Scream 4, she is a little bit more back to the Sidney from the first Scream, at least at the beginning. But once the shit starts to hit the fan, we see the fighter Sidney again. And then in Scream 5, she comes back to the fight yet again. And then based off of what we've seen in the trailer for Scream 7, it very much seems like this is a hardened Sidney Prescott. She's back to cracking those jokes at Ghostface's expense. She's back to wielding a weapon and going toward the action, not running away from it. Now, sure, she's moved away and she's trying to live a life of anonymity, basically, but anybody would do that when you are always constantly worried about some copycat finding you and wanting to kill you because you're Sidney Prescott. That doesn't mean that she has gone into a shell and that she's not a fighter anymore. Absolutely not. And every one of these movies since the first one, Sidney does get to a point where she's like, I'm here, let's do it. And I love that. You don't get that from Laurie Strode in Halloween or Halloween 2. In Halloween 2, when she shoots Michael Myers at the very end of the movie, it's because she is cornered and she's about to die. She doesn't take the fight to him until the end of Halloween H2O. Now, it's also aided by a really, really strong performance by Neve Campbell in all of these movies. Love or hate the Scream movies, love or hate 1 or 2 or 4, it doesn't matter. It's undeniable that Neve is pretty damn good in all of them. Now, she has better performances than other movies. I look to specifically Scream 3 as one of her best performances, but they're great performances. And in none of these movies do I feel like Sidney is outmatched. It's not like she's going up against Tyler Mane. And I think it helps that Ghostface can be anyone, and is usually anyone, ranging from 100-pound, 5'6" girls all the way to 6'4", 280-pound dudes. Ghostface can be anyone, but no matter who it is, I've never felt like Sidney wasn't going to be able to hold her own. And Neve really sells me on that because she is very tenacious. She is very ferocious. She is a fighter in every sense of the word. The movies play into that throughout their dialogue and the things happening on the periphery, absolutely, but they don't even need that. Neve sells that in the performance. The character of Sidney Prescott has progressed to that point. It feels very organic. It feels insanely real. One of the reasons why I've never been against the idea of bringing Neve Campbell back for every Scream movie is because I don't think that character has gotten stale, personally. When that character is constantly evolving and she is really hardening into the character she has become over the years, it keeps it interesting for me. It keeps me wanting to come back to see what's next for Sidney Prescott. I don't ever feel like at the end of a movie that her story should be done or needs to be done. Could it be done? Absolutely. You could make Scream 3's case for that being the end, and I would totally hear you out. But it also works that based off of how this franchise operates, it's always another copycat wanting to kill Sidney Prescott or wanting to get Sidney Prescott's attention because at the end of the day, she was the one that started it all. So I've never felt like, oh God, they're bringing Neve back again. No, if anything, I'm like, yeah, it's Scream. Sidney has to be a part of it. And that's kind of a double-edged sword because then it makes you wonder, well, what happens to the franchise when she's gone and she's no longer around as a character or, God forbid, Neve Campbell herself? Now, Scream 6 did show that you can still do a hyper-slasher with different characters, but how long can that go on for? A one-off here or there, but I think a lot of the reason that people come back to Scream is because they want to see Sidney Prescott. It's because they want to find out who this Ghostface is and why they want Sidney Prescott. All of that is because she's the greatest final girl. Period. She's the most badass. She's the most intelligent. She's the most resourceful. She'll get knocked down, but she gets back up. She's more relentless than Ghostface. The writing of this character has been super airtight for years, and I just have to give everybody involved in this franchise that has had a hand in writing that character immense credit. But I give most of the credit to Neve Campbell herself. Look, I understand if people have favorite final girls, and maybe it's not Sidney. Maybe the Scream franchise isn't for you, and that's totally fine. But I can't deny, I think that Sidney Prescott is hands down the greatest final girl in horror movie history, and I honestly wonder if throughout the rest of my life, if I'll see another one like her. I love Laurie Strode, and there's some takes on the character of Laurie Strode that I really love, specifically Halloween H2O. But when it comes to comparing to Sidney Prescott, I just think that's a fool's errand. I don't think anybody can. So if you want to make Scream movies, keep making them. Just bring Neve Campbell back. Because as long as Sidney Prescott is there, I'm in. When she's not, I don't want to live in a world where that's the case. But I want to hear down below in the comment section what you guys think. Do you think Sidney Prescott is the greatest horror final girl of all time? Do you agree that she is, but she's not your favorite? Or are you like, absolutely not, she's not even on my Mount Rushmore, which I would find to be blasphemous, but I'd like to hear from you regardless. So please sound off in the comment section below. I want to thank you guys for watching this video. Make sure to leave a like on it, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. This is Nick at the Lost River Drive-In, and I'm pulling out.